Good afternoon. Welcome if you're just joining us for the first time to Vote 2011. We've been counting votes now for 17 or 18 hours. The big story, of course, in Scotland, where Alex Salmond has achieved, many people thought it could never happen, has achieved an overall majority in the Scottish Parliament, crushed the Labour Party in many of their safest seats, and the Labour Party leader has already said he'll stand down in the autumn. David Cameron's Conservatives, doing better than many had expected, have gained councillors when many thought that they would be losing badly today on the council front. Ed Miliband and the Labour Party gained more than 600 councillors so far, so they're doing well at the moment. In some councils, including Gravesham, Ipswich and Chesterfield, they've gained control of. For the Liberal Democrats, for Nick Clegg, he admits a poor night continued into a poor day. So it's been a bad day for the Liberal Democrats. But now, let's first, though, before we go into all the detail on that, have an update on the rest of the news with Jane Hill.
Thanks, David. Good afternoon. And in fact, we begin our summary with a roundup of all the latest election news, which comes from our political correspondent, Adam Fleming.
Torrance David, Scottish National Party, 12,579 votes.
And with that, the SNP reached an overall majority in the Scottish Parliament, never achieved by any party under the Holyrood system. Alex Salmond returns as First Minister. Earlier, even he couldn't believe his party's spectacular success.
I'm finding it difficult to catch up with all of the incredible advances across Scotland. I mean, clearly, we've seen a very substantial movement to the SNP in the last week.
He's promised legislation in this Parliament that will pave the way for a referendum on independence. In the English council elections, the faces of these Lib Dems in Hull said it all. They lost 10 councillors here and handed control of the local authority to a jubilant Labour. There was a similar pattern across the north of England.
We've clearly had a bad result overnight, and we now need to learn the lessons, get up, dust ourselves down and move on.
David Cameron's Conservatives escaped the harsh punishment meted out to their partners in government, but the Prime Minister says it will be business as usual.
It will be a coalition government that's for the whole of the country. This is not about trading one policy for another policy. It's about doing the right thing for Britain. That's what I believe, that's what Nick Clegg believes, and that's what we'll do for our country.
Hi, Anne. Nice to meet you. Did you vote in the election? No, I didn't.
Enough voted for Labour that they made some gains in the south of England, such as this council, Gravesham in Kent.
I know that Labour still has further to go to win back trust from people. I say to those people who didn't vote Labour, I want to win your trust. I want us to be seen as your hope.
Carwyn Jones.
Labour won half the seats in the Welsh Assembly, but were left just one short of an overall majority. In Northern Ireland, counting for the Stormont Assembly started this morning and will continue tomorrow. And here in London's Docklands is where the result of the nationwide referendum on the voting system will be announced tonight. Counting is underway. Provisional turnout is higher than expected. But the Lib Dem Cabinet Minister Chris Huhne admits this result is likely to be another disappointment for his party. Adam Fleming, BBC News, Westminster.
In the day's other main story, the coroner at the inquests into the death of the 52 victims of the July the 7th London bombings has said there was no evidence that failings by any organisation or individual contributed to their deaths. Lady Justice Hallett ruled this morning that the victims were unlawfully killed. The Home Secretary Theresa May has said the government and the emergency services will learn lessons from the inquest. John Brain reports.
So, nearly 6 years after the carnage of the London bombings, some answers at last for those who survived and for the families of those who didn't. Inevitably, the inquest has confirmed that the 52 victims of 7/7 were unlawfully killed, but it limits the blame solely to the bombers themselves.
Armado stormed his compound.
The no side. So that's how things are looking there. And let's have a look at the way things stand in the country as a whole.
2011, under the parliamentary voting system and Constituencies Act hereby give notice that I have certified the following to the Chief Counting Officer. The total number of ballot papers counted was 81,366. The number of votes cast in favour of yes was 21,476. The number of votes cast in favour of no was 59,392. The number of ballot papers rejected was as follows. For unmarked or void for uncertainty, 498. Thank you.
So we'll have those figures in just a moment. Have you worked out anybody worked out the percentage there?
It's about 75% no.
75% no. In Sunderland. We have Broxbourne as well. We'll get those figures. Look, I think what we should do at this stage is have a look at these elections. We'll stick with this AV thing. It's obviously at the moment is running heavily no. We'll stick with it though and get those votes. But first of all, let's just have a look at what has happened up to now in the country as a whole on all the elections we've had. And join Jeremy Vine. Jeremy.
Well, we'll look first of all at AV. Let's come down Whitehall here and follow me past the Houses of Parliament and come through the St Stephen's entrance and into Central Lobby. And of course, the way that MPs are selected to come to this place will change if AV comes in, although the last result you've just shown doesn't suggest that's going to happen. Let's see. We'll have a look. 12 regions across the UK. The turnout we know from 8 of them so far. Let's just look at these regions and we'll be mounting up the votes and seeing exactly which of the two sides is near the winning line. And let me show you that winning line now. 42% is our estimated turnout here. We know the turnout from most of the areas, but not all of them. We estimated at 42%, and as you said, David, the winning line is therefore that number of votes, 9.873 million. 9,873,000 to win. The highest turnout so far, I can tell you, is in Scotland. So 50.7% here in Scotland, turning out to vote for and against AV. The lowest turnout is in London. Now, bear in mind, people in London, 35.4% turning out here, but they were only voting on AV. They weren't voting on their own parliament or assembly or even council seats. They just turned up to vote for AV, and we've already heard people who support AV saying, well, it was wonderful that they got that many people voting. So for and against in London, 35%, that's the turnout there. And the highest place of turnout in England, the highest turnout in England is in the southwest. So that's 44.6%. Obviously, they were coming into their polling stations for council elections as well. The significance of these turnouts is that, of course, if, for example, the southwest, with the highest turnout in England, votes overwhelmingly no, it packs a bit more punch than an area with a lower turnout which votes yes. At the moment, first results you've seen make it look as if it's going to be impossible for the yeses to win, but we'll give you the turnout figures as they come in.
Jeremy, thank you very much for that. Now, that's the AV side dealt with. What about the Scottish Parliament, the Welsh Parliament, Northern Ireland, we of course don't get till much later, and the councils, Emily?
The astonishing story of the night really has been in Scotland, where the SNP have got that magic number 65. Now, this is an overall majority. Look at their gains. They've made 23. Interesting, a point that our political editor makes out, in a country which has voted partly by proportional system, they've actually got this very solid majority here. Look at that big stretch, the whole swathe of the SNP, that dominant yellow now. We used to talk about the Lib Dems having the Highlands and Islands areas, and now look, they haven't got anything on mainland Scotland. They've got Orkney, they've got Shetland. Look at what has happened to the Labour vote then. It's been pushed to the south, but a lot of Edinburgh has gone. I'm just going to take you into some of these defences, which is quite interesting. If I show you, these are the seats that Labour was defending on the night, OK? This beltway of the M8 motorway going across from east to west. Look what happens if I update this now. An absolutely solid stretch of yellow crosses over, taking most of that political line there. I can scroll up and show you a very similar picture, even right down at the bottom. These are the safest ones. These should have been the ones that Labour was keeping, and they've absolutely gone yellow. A very similar picture then for the Lib Dems, as I was showing you. That was how they looked at the beginning of the night. If I just update that button, and show you what's happened. This solid stretch of the SNP. You're getting a sense now of just what a dramatic night it's been for Alex Salmond, who many people have said had run a properly presidential campaign, very personality-driven, and the kind of gains that he's made for Scotland. Let me take you to Wales now, because this is an interesting picture. Labour have done very well here. They've got this magic number. They've gained 4 seats, but there's a lot of discussion over whether they can actually go and have a workable government with 30, whether they need to get that extra 31 to really have the security. Who would they go into coalition with? Their old partners, Plaid, have now been pushed into 3rd place. Would they really want to go back into a coalition there? The Conservatives have gained 2, but can you really see any kind of operation between these two parties? Possibly they might bring in the Lib Dems. They have lost 1 seat, but it's possible that maybe Labour and the Lib Dems could go in some kind of coalition together in Wales, or maybe Colin Jones for Labour will decide to do that on his own with that workable majority, if not a very safe majority. Let's take you to England now and have a look at some of the council results. If you're expecting a bad night for the Conservatives, that hasn't materialised so far. We've had more than 2/3 in 237, I'm just showing, so we've got, what, about 40 to go. The Conservatives are up. These are net gains. They've gained 5. Labour has made gains of 24. That's probably not quite as substantial as they would have liked to see at this point in the night, in the day. The Lib Dems have got 8, but they've lost 9. They started with just 19 councils, so that has been a very bad night for them. Let's just go into some of these and you can see what's happened. These are the kind of losses then. Newcastle upon Tyne, this was a nail-biting fight, really, for Ed Miliband and Nick Clegg. But it has been taken by Labour. They'll be very pleased with that. That needed quite a good swing. Chesterfield needed an absolutely massive swing for Labour to take it, but they have done. They're sitting on a majority of 20. If I just show you that change overnight, you get a sense of quite what a dramatic result that has been for Labour, up 23 at the expense of the Lib Dems. But interestingly enough, if I just go back into the scoreboard, you can start to see who has taken the big hit on the night from this anti-Westminster feeling, if you like. I'm going to show you what that means, not in terms of councils, but councillors. The Conservatives have gained. They're up 55. And good gains for Labour, up 700. But the real hit of the night, again, in terms of the people, the seats lost, look at how badly the Lib Dems have fared at this point. They've lost nearly 600 councillors. They'll be looking at their coalition partners and thinking, why did we get all the blame?
Thanks very much, Emily. The results keep coming in on the referendum. It's looking pretty dire for the Yes campaign. Sunderland has announced 27% yes, 73% no. Southend-on-Sea came in, 28% yes, 72% no. Stirling in Scotland, interestingly, slightly closer, but still resounding defeat, 38% yes and 62% no. Now, whether that means that had the whole thing been done differently and constructed better, it would have had a different result, I wonder, because it does seem to be people who have listened to the argument and are deciding almost 2 to 1. Instantly, I said we'd try and find out what the betting was on this, and we can't get hold of any of the spread bettors because none of us has an account. We're so proper and right, and they won't tell us what the spread betting is. Let's join Nick Robinson, who's down on College Green. Nick.
Well, these are extraordinary results that are coming in, David, aren't they? And just show that it is likely to be an overwhelming no vote, which will add to the gloom for Nick Clegg and add to the joy for David Cameron. Not that he'll let us see it. The word I'm told from Downing Street is no gloating. I doubt you'll see the Prime Minister again today. He will not wish to be seen to be saying anything other than business as usual. We get on with the job we were given a year ago. And I am reminded of that election night you and I covered exactly a year ago today, because in a sense there are real similarities with it. Few predicted the results. Few knew what the consequences would be. Then it was a hung parliament and a coalition. Today, these dramatic results in Scotland, this overwhelming rejection, it would appear, of that change in the voting system. And who on earth would have foreseen that David Cameron, a year into a coalition government, after an election he failed to win outright, after dramatic public spending cuts, would actually have gains to celebrate, not just to the number of councils, but to the number of councillors as well.
Nick, thank you very much indeed. Well, now, Peter Mandelson has been listening, and I'm sure we'll have things to say about Labour's victories and defeats and all the rest of it. But what about the campaign, first of all, which we're talking about at the moment, Peter Mandelson? You thought the Yes campaign didn't handle the argument properly and didn't go for Cameron in the way that it should have done. Can you just explain what it is you would like to have seen happen, and also your reaction to these figures, which are coming in pretty devastatingly, 30 yes and 70% no?
No, it's going to be a very decisive no vote against changing the electoral system to AV. I think that's very disappointing, but I'm equally entirely unsurprised by it. Nobody could have foreseen the extent to which the whole vote over the last 24 hours has become a sort of referendum on the Liberal Democrats in general and Nick Clegg in particular. And we've paid a big price for combining the AV referendum with the first elections to be held following the general election last year. But I think there were some more fundamental reasons. I think the groundwork was not done for this referendum. I think that the public sort of felt the thing had come out of the blue as a result of some sort of arrangement between the coalition partners, and I think they didn't see why AV was such a big deal. I don't think they felt that AV was really the solution to many of the problems they feel are in our political system, and I'm afraid I don't think the Yes campaign was strong enough to change that view. Secondly, and equally, I give credit to David Cameron. I mean, he exercised some very bold leadership in this AV campaign. He mobilised, scrambled his party and the Tory supporting media, even at the expense of his own coalition's unity. And of course he did that because for the Tories, so much is at stake. For them, first past the post is an absolutely essential system to retain for their interests. And not for the first time, the alternative, more progressive parties were divided in their view, and sure enough, the Tories have won the day.
You say that, and we know the Tories are very much in favour of first past the post, but Vernon Bogdanor, who was here a moment ago, was saying that in reality AV wouldn't have changed things that much anyway. It would give them slightly more seats to the Liberal Democrats, but it wasn't that big a deal.
Well, that may or may not be the case, and speculation is a bit pointless. All I could see was, first of all, the Tories feeling a great sense of sort of danger, a near panic about this AV referendum at the beginning, which of course triggered David Cameron's intervention and the way he sustained his campaigning against any change throughout, for perfectly obvious reasons. When the Tories are able to split the alternative to them between Labour and Liberal Democrats and achieve what we've seen over the last 100 years, a dominance of our general elections and our political system, you can understand why they don't want to give it up.
Well, the parties, of course, were divided on this, and David Blunkett...
Well, the other parties were, yeah.
Well, and
Labour.
And Labour, yeah. David Blunkett is listening to this, but I've also got Anthony Green, an election analyst from Australia. Now, one of the things we heard all the time, disparagingly said about this, oh, well, it's only used by Papua New Guinea and Australia, as though that was a way of condemning it. What was your view of the way that the campaign for yes was run here? Do you think the arguments didn't get across? Do you think David Blunkett and his argument was more powerful than Peter Hain here and Peter Mandelson?
I think the yes case didn't. They put forward a series of issues to do with members of parliament and how they would perform. They didn't discuss it as an electoral system. The no case put forward quite a number of arguments about why this was confusing. They put forward the detail to try and confuse people. There were a number of misrepresentations of the Australian system along the way, but in the end it's something that people weren't thinking about, didn't really understand, and in those circumstances there's an old slogan used at referendums in Australia, if you don't know, vote no, and I think that tends to be what it is. People didn't understand in those circumstances, they were urged to vote no. The other thing to say, and you're seeing this in the early referendum figures, is it has aligned by party. If you look at the polls, Conservative voters were solidly against this. Liberal Democrats were solidly in favour of this, and that the Labor vote has split. Now, without Labor being relatively strongly behind the referendum, this referendum was never going to pass. The AV was never going to pass. And already we're seeing in figures there like Sunderland, a strong Labor voting area, that it's been heavily defeated. So
this is a traditional election shot of a helicopter. This is Alex Salmond, leader of the Scottish National Party, arriving in a suitably yellow-blue helicopter in the grounds of, I'm not quite sure where, but in Edinburgh. True style. There we are. Well, we can watch helicopters land, or we needn't watch helicopters land. Although he is waving to the camera as he comes down. So, well, Alex Salmond has got... Peter Mandelson, what do you make of this victory for the SNP and Alex Salmond in Scotland, and Labour being completely trounced there?
Well, I think Labour has to reflect on this very deeply. I think that too often the Labour Party in Scotland has exuded a sort of sense of entitlement, if you like, a sort of, vote Labour because you know you want to sort of campaign. But I think there are two other factors here. One is that the campaign became very presidential, and Alex Salmond is a confident and sure-footed campaigner. Ian Gray, very solid, very decent, but doesn't match Mr. Salmond's showmanship. Secondly, I think that we've seen the removal of the sort of independence issue from Scottish politics. It made it easier for many more people to vote for the SNP, knowing that they weren't voting for separation. And I think that that has released a lot more support for the SNP, certainly for the Scottish Parliament at any rate, and that has been, I'm afraid, a danger for the Labour Party, as we have seen in the result.
But we've always been told in the past that Labour virtually owned Glasgow, for instance, that the machine politics of Glasgow meant it was completely unassailable, even incidentally to members of the Labour Party who fell out of favour with the people who controlled the Glasgow Labour Party. So that it seemed to be almost like a mafia in charge of Glasgow for many years, and now they've been knocked out by the SNP. That is pretty extraordinary, isn't it?
Well, I wouldn't necessarily endorse all your comments there, David. You wouldn't expect me to do so. But I think that the Labour Party, as I say, can't be so presumptuous about its support. It's got to work, campaign for its support, reach out much more effectively, campaign, frankly, much more professionally in Scotland if they're going to match the firepower of the SNP.
Okay, well, let's just come back. Perhaps we needn't watch Alex Salmond's helicopter for much longer because we've got human faces here around the table. And we'll go back when Alex Salmond comes out because he's obviously doing the full presidential bit, and we'll come out waving and no doubt pointing. You notice that way people point now, and they come out and point. Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Even if there's nobody there, which is great.
Bushitis, David.
Bushitis, yes. Okay, and we've got, what result have we got coming in? Another final Scottish result coming in, yes, in a moment. Emily.
Yeah, just have a look at this, because we were talking in those sort of quite dramatic overtones about that solid majority of 65 for the SNP. That didn't include some of those regional top-ups. And now look at it, they're on 69. They've made gains of 23. That's almost double what the Labour Party have got there. So at one stage when we were prepping for this, we were told 65 was one of those numbers that no one party would ever arrive at which no one party would ever arrive. Look what they've done. Not only have they got 65, but they've actually beaten them. Look where the Lib Dems are now. They're just in Orkney and Shetland. Labour, if you come really close, they seem to have lost pretty much all of Edinburgh. I'm just looking at that one little bit, which seems to be the one part they've held on. Don't forget, before this evening, the SNP didn't have a single seat in the Scottish capital. So that has been amazing inroads, and just really, you can see it all in the colours on the map, a predominant yellow there for the whole of the country of Scotland.
Thanks so much. Well, Chris Grayling joins us here too, a minister in the Conservative government. What do you make of the argument that was put by Peter Mandelson, for instance, that you played a very canny game with all this, and that's why you were able to conflate the argument over a change in the Constitution? And this isn't, by implication, this isn't genuinely what people would decide if they'd had the arguments put more carefully and had the freedom to vote outside the normal election process, a special ballot.
Well, I mean, I have to say, I think that's a pretty insulting view of the electorate. The reality is that the people have been asked the question. It looks at this stage as if they've given a pretty clear-cut answer. I really don't think anybody can look back at any particular event in the campaign, any particular choice of date, any particular part of what's happened in the last few months and say that is what has caused such a decisive result. I mean, I think we've put a question to the British public, they've taken a look and given us a pretty clear answer.
Do you think the arguments put by the No campaign were hyperbole?
Oh,
or justified? I mean, you remember the argument about don't vote AV, you'll get people like Clegg, who breaks his promises. That was one of your campaign's slogans.
We have argued most fundamentally around the fact that what AV does is enable candidates that finish second or third in the popular vote to end up elected as the Member of Parliament. And certainly my experience on the doorstep, talking to people throughout the campaign locally, has been that is the thing that has resonated the most. You can end up with somebody who is second or third amongst the choices of popularity in a particular community, in a particular constituency, and yet that person is the person who's elected. And I think that, more than anything else, is what people looked at and said, I don't want that.
Jeremy, do you agree with
the
that?
irony is, of the three party leaders, the only one who finished first in his own party leadership was Nick Clegg. Both Ed Miliband and David Cameron needed preferences and transfers to overtake the person who'd won in the first round in their own party leadership. I do think the No campaign had some very disingenuous claims. David Blunkett has himself been good enough to admit that the figure on the cost was, in his own words, made up, which is a polite way of saying that they lied about the cost of the campaign. But I don't think that the Yes campaign in the end made a compelling case for change.
Nicola Sturgeon, with a kiss on the cheek of her party leader, Nicola Sturgeon, the deputy leader of the SNP there.
Royal wedding, yeah.
Royal wedding, you say. Cynic.
But I don't think the Yes campaign ultimately, you have to convince people to change from the status quo, and I don't think they did that.
Let's just talk about Alex Salmond for a moment, because clearly he's arriving in, it's quite an amazing scene, or an amazing moment for him, having taken a majority of the seats in the Scottish Parliament, huge crowd of press around him, and a pseudo-presidential arrival in a helicopter waiting until the press had gathered, and Nicola Sturgeon was there. Peter Hain, what do you think this holds for Scotland, this victory of the SNP, and indeed what does it hold for Labour?
Well, I think Peter Mandelson was absolutely right about Labour's performance and the points he made. What I think we should now do is call Alex Salmond's bluff. He is somebody who believes in independence for Scotland. Well, let's bring it on. Let's have this referendum that he keeps threatening tantalisingly but never quite delivers, and dispose of this issue, shoot his fox, and then let's see what he delivers for Scotland.
Are you saying that the Westminster Parliament should decide, which it can do, decide to have a referendum in Scotland on independence, whether he likes it or not?
No, I don't think we should do that at all. That would play right into his hands.
Right,
what
so
I think we should
do?
say to him is, you believe in independence, you've been threatening this referendum all through the last Scottish parliamentary term, now you've got a big majority, you can proceed actually to vote in the Scottish Parliament for a referendum because you have the majority to deliver it, which he previously didn't, which is why he backed away. Well, why doesn't he do it? Why doesn't he go and stick a bill down immediately the Scottish Parliament convenes and proceed? I think the reason he won't do that is because he knows that a referendum would be decisively lost, and then where does he stand?
That's no help to you, is it, if that happens? Because he can just say, well, we're carrying on, we've got a lot of other business to do. It reinforces the SNP position.
But it exposes the, if you like, the essential dishonesty of the SNP position, is they are committed to independence on a matter of principle. I understand that, but that it's a game they've been playing, ramping up their people, but actually being unable to deliver it.
We've got Ian Gray, the leader for the time being of the Scottish Labour Party, talking about the result. He has said he's going to stand down as leader in the autumn. Let's just hear what he had to say.
The electorate have certainly spoken and given a very, very clear result, and there are some very hard and fundamental lessons for the Scottish Labour Party, not least about my own responsibility and role as leader of Labour in the Scottish Parliament. It's my view that we have to address some very fundamental questions about the structures and organisation of the Labour Party in Scotland, what went wrong and where we go from here. I want to start that process. I want to start that process off, but in the autumn I will stand down, and it will be for the Labour Party to decide how we go forward from there. I've spoken with Ed Miliband, and we've agreed that we do need this fundamental root and branch review of the Labour Party in Scotland, and that will now happen. I also want to take this opportunity to thank all of those Labour activists and supporters who have worked so hard and gave us still so much support last night because they believe in a better and fairer world. And also I want to pay tribute to those many colleagues who've made a great contribution to Holyrood but will not be returning to the Scottish Parliament.
That's Ian Gray, the leader for the moment of the Labour Party in Scotland, who had such a bad night. The referendum scoreboard, we've had 28 local authorities giving their results so far. It's running 30 yes and 70% no. 30% yes, 70% no. But let's just go back to that Scottish result, because it's difficult to take in the enormity of the change in the politics of Scotland that yesterday's voting had. But Jeremy, can you give us some idea of the scale of this?
Well, it's just quite extraordinary if we just have a look at the map. And we've dwelt on this a lot, but it's just worth looking again at the fact that the Lib Dems are pushed out there in orange, and everything else is yellow right up until we get to the areas of Glasgow and Edinburgh. Even there, the Labour Party pinned back, Labour taking a Conservative seat in the south. But just an extraordinary performance by the SNP. And let's try and put it in context and see where they've come from since the Parliament was first established in 1999. So you see here the leaders from the point at which the graph ends. Let's go back to 1999 here and have a look at this result, the first election to the Scottish Parliament, and you can see Labour 10 points clear of the SNP. So the Scots Nationalists 10 points behind, Conservatives 16 and the Liberal Democrats on 14. The Scottish National Party then switched leaders. They have John Swinny as leader. What happens? The next election, 03, 35% for Labour, 24. So again, more than 10% behind now, and the Conservatives and the Liberal Democrats bumping along in third and fourth place. And then we have the last elections in 2007, and here the SNP did better. They just pipped Labour there, 33% to 32%, and they got themselves into position as the largest single party and ruled as a minority. But no one surely expected what happened next. This is the graph. Just look at this. It's just remarkable to see this in Scottish or even British politics. This amazing climb by the SNP right up to 45%, which is what they've won in the elections in the last 24 hours, leaving Labour more than 10 points behind. And by the way, for those people looking at the Labour figure, you're right, it hasn't moved. But there's that sense that the SNP have just overwhelmed Labour, who've stood still. And if we go down the graph, have a quick look down the bottom, Conservatives 14%, and the Lib Dems really with a big problem on 8% of the vote in these elections. So just come back to the top of the graph for me, and we'll follow the line back, and you just get a sense of the dramatic sweep of this SNP victory, the way that they've come back. 45%, remember. Where did they start in 1999? Second place, a long way behind Labour on 29%. Different story in Wales. Let's just have a look and focus particularly on the Welsh Nationalists and what's going on there. So I'll bring on the new map of Wales. Plaid Cymru, the Welsh Nationalists, of course, in green here. The Lib Dems in orange, and Labour, as we know, painted quite a lot more red down in the south of Wales. Let's have a look at the graphs here, going back to 1999, again, the year in which the Welsh Assembly was first formed. And you see, remarkably similar result, don't you? Because Labour here in first place, 38%, and 10 points behind the Nationalists. Plaid Cymru on 28%, and then the Conservatives and the Liberal Democrats in third and fourth place. And then somehow Labour managed to avoid the hit that the Labour Party in Scotland took over the Iraq War. In Wales, they distanced themselves from the party at Westminster, and they won a solid victory, 40% of the vote. And you see Plaid Cymru lower down, just struggling to catch up with 21 to 20. They've actually just almost trading places with the Conservatives for second. And watch what happens next, the 2007 election. Labour come down. Do Plaid Cymru take advantage of that? Do the Welsh Nationalists come back? Have a look at these percentages. No, they don't. The Conservatives actually take second place, 10 points behind Labour. Plaid Cymru in third on 22. And worth just mentioning the Lib Dems in 2007. Where were they? Right down there. Let's have a look, 15%. OK, then the graph that shows how well Labour this time have done in Wales. Look at that. 42% of the vote. So they have really solidified their vote in their heartlands in Wales, 42%. And then the Conservatives have reason to cheer here because you can see that they're in second place with 25%. And Plaid Cymru obviously have got some problems to address. Third place with 19%. You compare that to the figures we were seeing from the SNP. There's no comparison at all, is there? One more for you. Let's again just check the Liberal Democrat figure right down the bottom because it's very difficult to find any place. How much have they got, the Liberal Democrats? Let's have a look. 11%. So very difficult to find anywhere where they've prospered at all in these elections held across the country. OK, let's just take this line back. 42% for Labour this time. What happens here? Well, it's pretty much where they started in 1999, but a bit above it. But you can see how Labour's vote has really held good for them in Wales. But again, the story of the night, really, the SNP's extraordinary march in Scotland.
We're joined by the First Minister for Wales, Carwyn Jones, who has been governing in coalition with the Nationalist Party, Plaid Cymru. Mr Jones, thank you for joining us from outside the Assembly building and congratulations on your victory in Wales. Are you now going to take over the reins of government alone as a Labour government in the Welsh Assembly, or will you still need support from other parties?
Well, what's important is that we have a Labour-led Assembly government here in Wales. As the largest party, it's our duty to form such a government. There are a number of options. We could look at going it alone. Obviously, in the past, there have been coalitions. And, of course, there are informal arrangements that can be made between parties as well. Over the next few days, all the parties will be looking at their situations, but it's important that we get a stable government in place as quickly as possible.
From Labour's point of view, you have a heavy responsibility on your shoulders now, don't you? Because you are the only Labour politician in a position of power in the parliaments and assemblies of the United Kingdom, with Labour being trounced in Scotland.
Well, yes, I mean, we know that we have a lot of work to do. We know that we have to make sure that we carry out our programme for government that we had in our manifesto. I mean, the election's over. It's now that the hard work begins. It's important, of course, for Wales, but what we wanted to do as well was to show that there was an alternative to the policies being pursued by the UK government.
Why do you think Plaid Cymru has suffered so badly?
I think the difference between Scotland and Wales lies partially in the fact that the SNP appear to have been successful in getting a lot of disgruntled Lib Dem voters. Those voters in Wales came to us, and because of that, of course, we've managed to achieve the highest percentage of the vote that we've ever had in an Assembly election.
How will you then go about getting these policies through? Because as you well know, in England, there's a certain jealousy about policies that are pursued both by the Scottish Parliament and the Welsh Assembly in terms of welfare issues and support, for instance, in your case, for students in Wales, not having to pay higher tuition fees, free breakfast, all those sort of things. How do you think... sorry, I'm just being told that Alex Salmon is about to speak, so forgive me if I break away, and can I come back to you? Could you just stay with us? You may like to hear what he has to say.
Brown. And earlier today, it gave the Scottish National Party our 65th and winning seat in the Scottish parliamentary elections. I'm therefore delighted to confirm that I will be seeking re-election by the Scottish Parliament as the First Minister of Scotland. Now, earlier today, in a very gracious phone call, Ian Gray conceded defeat and also assured me that he would seek that the Labour Party would work constructively with the SNP. I wish Ian well for the future, since I understand he's standing down as the Labour Party leader in the autumn. Before I left Aberdeenshire, Tavish Scott also phoned me to also assure me that the Liberal Democrats would seek to work constructively as an opposition in the Scots Parliament. Later this evening, I'll be speaking to the Prime Minister and laying down markers as to what this result, what this mandate means in terms of Scotland's relationship with the United Kingdom. So I welcome the declarations from the opposition parties about constructive opposition. Because although the SNP have a majority of the seats, we don't have a monopoly of wisdom. And the areas which we want to pursue as an immediate priority in terms of reinforcing the powers of the Scotland Bill to give economic teeth to that legislation going through the Westminster Parliament are areas which carry not just the support of the SNP but the support of other parties. In identifying borrowing powers to keep the revival in the construction industry of Scotland moving, to keep employment and jobs and recovery in Scotland, we have the support of the Labour Party. In identifying the control of the Crown Estate Commission so that Scotland gets the benefit from its vast renewable wealth of offshore resources in a way we never did in terms of our vast oil and gas resources, we have the support of the Liberal Democrats. And as, of course, in identifying the need to devolve corporation tax powers, it was a committee of the entire Parliament who made the point that that power would have to be devolved to keep Scottish industry competitive with developments elsewhere. We have a majority of the seats, but no monopoly on wisdom, and we'll welcome the support across the Parliament as we seek to pursue these powers for the benefit of our people and to ensure jobs in our economy. I believe the Scottish National Party won this election because Scotland wants to travel in hope and to aim high. Scotland has chosen to believe in itself and our shared capacity to build a fair society. The nation can be better. It wants to be better. I'll do all I can as First Minister to make it better. We have given ourselves the permission to be bold. We will govern fairly and wisely, with an eye to the future, but a heart to forgive. This is not just a victory for a single political party. I believe it's a victory for a society, a people, and a nation. Because to make this historic breakthrough, to win this election, required more than the hard work of the Scottish National Party faithful. It needed the trust of the people, all the people. When our movement began, it called itself the National Party of Scotland. And that is what it is again today, a party for all the people, a national party. Team Scotland has won this election. The job creators, the carers, the nurses, the small businesses, the ambitious and the aspirational, they have all won. They're not fixed on the past in all its bright colour, but our eyes are on the future and the dreams that can be realised. I'll govern for all of the ambitions of Scotland and all the people who imagine that we can live in a better land. This party, the Scottish Party, the National Party, carries your hope, and we shall carry it carefully and make the nation proud. Thank you very much.
Speaking about his aspirations and, interestingly, talking about what he called the power to be bold, but in effect describing what he seems to see almost as a voluntary one-party state. Everybody is included, of whatever party. And particularly curiously, absolutely no mention of this boldness leading to a bold decision to ask the Scottish people whether they wanted independence.
Fascinating. I think Alex Salmond, of course, delighted, but has just revealed what his strategy is going to be. It's not going to be calling a referendum next week, next month, next year, or even the year after. It's going to be a step-by-step, notch by notch, trying to buy in the other parties, mentioning things like putting economic teeth on legislation that's already in front of Westminster, trying to talk about borrowing powers, saying that other parties already supported some of these plans. And I think there we saw a move to try to create an idea that independence almost becomes inevitable. And that's not about now, that's about later, towards the end of the term. Interestingly, as throughout most of the election campaign, no mention by most of the parties, apart from on occasion by the Conservatives, of the real financial challenges that Scotland faces.
The financial challenge is something I wanted to ask Peter Hain about, because I was before we were so rudely interrupted by Alex Salmond coming to his podium. I was talking to Carwyn Jones, who's had to go now, about the relationship with Westminster, and Alex Salmond makes the same point. You both, the Labour in Wales and the SNP now in Scotland, have got ambitious plans that cost money, which has to be negotiated with Westminster. And so you're both, in a way, in the same pickle, facing the coalition and George Osborne with his plans for cutting the deficit, if you're to make headway. Is that correct?
Well, yes, we are. I mean, that's one of the reasons Wales voted so decisively for Labour, to stand up for Wales against the Conservative Liberal Democrat coalition. But they've already cut the Welsh budget by well over £1 billion. We're already having to make savings and to make cuts. But we're doing so in a way that protects people and is fair, so that, for example, we're maintaining our free prescriptions, because that hits people who have high prescription needs when they have to pay for them. We've done that in Wales. We're maintaining that. We're not punishing students by trebling their tuition fees in a way that's happening under the Conservatives and Liberal Democrats in England. And we're doing so by having to make choices. I mean, we haven't got any more money. It's not like there's a lot of largesse running around in Wales. In fact, we disproportionately have had relatively less than Scotland, for example. We've had to husband our resources quite carefully. And Carwyn Jones is determined also to reform our public services to get better education performance, better health.
But how can you offer bread and circuses if you say you're cutting back, when in England, quite clearly, the coalition would like to do that, but can't? You're muttering what you're offering less.
I'm just saying that if you've got the same amount of money, and you're right, that money doesn't grow on trees any more in Wales than it does in England, and you're giving all these goodies to people in Wales that they don't get in England, I'm interested to know what you're taking away from people in Wales, what people in Wales get less of than people in England.
Well, so far nobody's been able to show that anybody gets anything less in Wales. What we have done is well, you tell me.
Unless they're more efficient. If they were more efficient in Wales than you are in Westminster, then they would have money to spend.
Yes, indeed. I mean, you point to a single thing where we are underperforming in terms of delivery.
I don't understand why Labour in government up until a year ago in London, they kept putting prescription charges up. Labour, of course, introduced tuition fees for students in England. If they could be done so efficiently and easily in Wales at no cost at all, why didn't Labour do all these things in England?
Jeremy, I'm not saying they were at no cost. Different choices were made about different priorities. In Wales, what we've said is, as I've said already, it's wrong to punish young people by tuition fees. It's wrong to strip educational maintenance allowances away from young people, so stopping them staying on a college or training or schools.
Peter, let's remember how we got to this point in the first place. It was not a Conservative government, it was not a Liberal Democrat government that built up the biggest deficit in our peacetime history. We're trying to clear up the mess from a disastrous
It's a banking crisis that created the deficit, not
David,
you signed up to the plan.
David, listening to the other point to bear in mind, it sounds as if this has been a great day of triumph for Labour. In Wales, they barely struggled to the halfway line. In Scotland, it's been disastrous. They set out hopes to win. In fact, they've been humiliated. In England, they've nothing like the gains they expected to. But this has been a disastrous day for Labour.
We have to go to Jeremy Ryan, otherwise, for some reason or other, we'll lose him. I don't think we'll lose him, actually. I hope we don't lose you, Jeremy. But I've got something else to do, and I want to hear from Laura Brunswick. There are some points. But Jeremy, on AV, let's just deal with that.
Yeah, you don't worry. Thank you. Let's have a look at the map here. If it's grey, we don't know the answer yet. But if it's black, it's a vote against AV, and if it's white, it's a vote for it. And you notice immediately we can't find any white really on the map so far. So what you're getting in councils and local authority areas is an overwhelming no. Just show you what we've got. 40 turnout figure, 42% turnout. There we go. And this is the percentage that you're looking at so far from the actual votes counted. 70%. Here we are. Right up here, overwhelmed. I call it overwhelming. It's almost an understatement. It's 70% no, and 30% of people who voted saying, so far counted votes saying that they would like to come in as a new voting system for the Westminster elections. I'll show you a couple of regions before I hand back to you. Let's go to Scotland first of all. All the votes piling up in Scotland, 50.7% turnout. That's a high turnout. There were some predictions before today that actually the Scots might be more in favour of AV than other parts of the country. It doesn't look to be the case here so far. 65% no in Scotland, 35% yes, 50% turnout. So it's unequivocal in Scotland. And one more region for you. We come down here just to the east of England. Let me show you. 43% turnout. What are we looking at here? Just over 43%. And the no's, 73% for that. And 27% for the yeses. So overwhelming. Even on the early votes, they've been quite extraordinary. Back to you.
You had a couple of points to make.
Just in terms of those things, it's interesting to mark. One of the lowest no vote has been 60%. There's not one part of the country so far where we're seeing enthusiasm and really a great sense for this change. Just to spin back a little to what we were talking about in terms of Scotland and Wales. David Cameron, I think for the first time recently in the last couple of weeks, started to bring up what's happening in Wales in the House of Commons. He started to talk about cuts. He says Labour's making the NHS in Wales, which was starting to do it there, and that could be an dynamic more and more. We have this different patchwork. Western politicians use this that are particularly Wales, hurl abusively at the opponents in Westminster. Just one other point.
Sorry, just I think to abuse Wales, and they're saying that they're doing all things being more generous everywhere.
Well, they have Cameron's intention as Labour and Wales discussing the NHS. This debate may go on out between Conservative and Labour, but it's interesting that the reality of the resolution around starting, I think, brought more into the change in Westminster. Also, just in Scotland, there was recently an independent review ordered by Alex Salmond to look at the kind of finances of the country, an independent budget. It recommended that all those things that the English voters to the flat jealously, like ISF, first care, free prescriptions, it recommended that it should all be looked at and it should all not necessarily be protected. We have no clue at this stage that Alex Salmond is going to have courage to start talking about those sorts of things.
Are you saying that the long tradition of the various reasons we're going into of Scotland and Wales and Scotland getting a larger proportion of that tax revenue is going to gradually fall back, so that England, particularly places like the North East, are no longer able to play in that other parts of the UK have done fairly.
Well, there are two things here. One is that this on spending is happening everywhere. Around Scotland and Wales are being hacked back. Secondly, across the country, there is a review of how all these community formulas are looked at now. So far, and I say the word are the formula. So far, there is no determination by the government to look at it again. They are certainly looking at how money is calculated.
He said, I never meant this.
He believes it should be looked at. Absolutely.
Just make a small point on this. If the government is going to look at it, then look at the independent Health Commission of experts. The Treasury has not been able to tell their analysis. I know that they tried and when Labour is out there, how they haven't managed under the Conservative and Democrats. But actually, Wales has been disproportionately funded in recent times because universities in the English average and interestingly, the North East of England.
We've only got a few minutes, so let's get to the big picture without making it so general as it not mean anything. What do you think, Chris, the effect of what's happened in Wales, Scotland, just to step that point, is going to be on the decisions made by the Treasury in London? There's going to be a CT on those two.
I don't think that we should deviate to the United Kingdom. The United Kingdom has duties to take citizens in the interests of all citizens of the whole of the United Kingdom. The issue about the finances of Scotland and Wales, in this election campaign we've heard a lot of promises about things that will be done, about extra support that's going to be provided at a time when money is extremely tight. And I think the question now for Labour in Wales and the SNP in Scotland is how are they actually going to deliver on the promises they've made? We're dealing with a tough financial situation. There is not extra money to pluck out of nowhere. How are they actually going to deliver what they've committed to?
Let's end on a cheerful note with the total disaster for the Liberal Democrats, not only electorally, but also in this referendum, which Nick went out of his way to fight for and to argue for, and which is run at 30 yes, 70% no.
I don't accept it's a disaster, Nick Clegg.
You don't accept it's a disaster.
We gave people an opportunity to have a voting system which should give them more choice and a stronger voice, and people chose not to take it, but that's entirely up to them.
Disaster. If you offer something, people say no. It's like saying we were defeated in Scotland and our votes went to the SNP.
If we'd had a referendum on whether women should have a vote when that was introduced, and the campaign against had said that women weren't capable of exercising informed choices and so on and so forth, and there'd been a no vote, that wouldn't have been the fault of the person who organised the referendum. So, you know, we've had a vote, and we move on, and people prefer to have a system where they have less choice, less power. Nick Clegg delivered his party for a yes vote. David Cameron delivered his for a no. Ed Miliband couldn't convince the majority of Labour MPs, but you know, we are where we are. People have a choice about how they're governed. That's why we have a referendum, and they decided they wanted to stick with the existing.
So it's been a good day.
It's been a disappointing day because we've lost a lot of very good councillors who are very effective at serving their communities, but we have had to take the necessary decisions to try and get to grips with the terrible deficit that we inherited from Labour, and I think it's right that we are making a mature and responsible contribution to the government of our country.
Brief last point.
The difficulty for Nick Clegg is this wasn't just about giving people a choice. This was about persuading his own party it was worth going in with the Conservatives, and he hasn't got that, and that will mean, particularly in the grassroots, that the people will say, if we're not going to get this, our big prize, is it worth staying around? Not all of them, probably not anybody near the leadership in other parts of the party.
Is it worth staying around in coalition, or should we leave the Liberal Democrat Party and go somewhere else? Hold on, let me just
I think in terms of the Westminster Party, that is not going to happen. But in terms of the activist base, there will be people who will just be wondering whether or not it's worth it.
Okay, well, for the moment, that's all on BBC Two here. The 6 o'clock news begins shortly on BBC One. Full election coverage continues, though, on the BBC News channel with Vote 2011 throughout the evening as we await the result of the AV referendum. So I hope we'll see you again.
2010, can anyone step up and steal their crown? For all the twists, turns and inside track of the Formula One season, join us for Inside F1 on the BBC News channel this weekend.